There are champions, there are legends, and then there's Charles Oliveira. Today, he's recognized as one of the most dangerous submission artists the UFC has ever seen. He holds records that many believed would never be broken, has finished some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts, and became the lightweight champion of the world. But none of that was guaranteed. In fact, when Charles Oliveira first entered the UFC, many fans didn't believe he'd ever reach the top. Some called him too fragile. Others questioned his heart. Many believed he'd never become a champion. Yet, years later, the same man who was written off would force the entire MMA world to rethink everything they thought they knew about him. This is the incredible story of Charles Oliveira. Born on October 17, 1989, in Guarujá, Brazil, Charles Oliveira's life wasn't easy. His family didn't have much money, and like many young Brazilian children, he grew up surrounded by hardship. But one challenge stood out above all the others. As a child, Charles was diagnosed with a condition that affected his legs. Doctors feared it could stop him from living a normal, active life, and at one point there were serious concerns that sport simply wouldn't be possible for him. Thankfully, after years of treatment and determination, those fears slowly disappeared. The boy who wasn't expected to compete in sports would eventually dedicate his life to them. Charles first discovered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a teenager. It didn't take long for coaches to realize they were watching someone special. His ability to learn submissions, remain calm under pressure, and attack from almost any position made him stand out immediately. Success came quickly. After proving himself in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitions, Charles transitioned into professional mixed martial arts. From the very beginning, one thing became clear. If the fight hit the ground, it was usually over. As he built an impressive record in Brazil, the UFC started paying attention. At just 20 years old, Oliveira received the call every fighter dreams of. The UFC wanted him. For many fighters, simply reaching the UFC is the goal. For Charles, it was only the beginning of an incredible journey. His debut immediately showed fans what he was capable of. Young, fearless, and constantly searching for submissions, Oliveira quickly became known as one of the most exciting prospects in the sport, and people started wondering just how far this young Brazilian could go. But the UFC is the toughest proving ground in mixed martial arts. Soon, Charles began facing tougher competition, and for the first time in his career, things didn't always go his way. Losses started appearing on his record. Some came through difficult stylistic matchups. Others came after brutal battles with elite competition. Every defeat gave critics more ammunition. Fans started saying the same things over and over. He's talented, but he'll never become champion. He folds under pressure. He isn't tough enough. Those words followed Charles for years. Most fighters would have let that criticism define them. Charles Oliveira didn't. Instead of quitting, he improved. Instead of making excuses, he came back better. Every loss became another lesson. Every setback became another reason to keep chasing the dream. Without realizing it, the MMA world was watching the foundations of one of the greatest comeback stories in UFC history being built. And the best was still to come. Because while many fighters would have been broken by the criticism Charles Oliveira received, he used it as motivation. The biggest change in Charles wasn't just his skill, it was his mentality. Early in his UFC career, Charles was already one of the most talented submission artists in the sport. But at the highest level of MMA, talent alone isn't enough. Every mistake gets punished, and Charles was learning that the hard way. Many fans questioned whether he would ever reach his full potential. But instead of quitting, Charles continued improving. His striking became sharper, his confidence grew, and most importantly, he became much more comfortable under pressure. Charles eventually moved up to the lightweight division, and this decision completely changed his career. At lightweight, fans started seeing a different version of Charles Oliveira. He wasn't just surviving against elite opponents anymore, he was dominating them. His incredible submission ability was still there, but now it was combined with improved striking, better decision-making, and a confidence that had been missing earlier in his career. Fight after fight, Charles proved that he was no longer the fighter people doubted years before. He became one of the most dangerous finishers in the UFC. Charles wasn't looking for decisions, he was looking for finishes. And more often than not, he found them. Charles' incredible run continued, and he built one of the most impressive finishing streaks in UFC history. But even after all the wins, one thing was still missing: the UFC Lightweight Championship. For years, Charles had chased the dream that many thought would never happen: becoming a champion. Then, in 2021, he finally got his opportunity. Standing across from him was one of the most dangerous fighters in the division, Michael Chandler. Many people wondered if Charles could handle the pressure of the biggest moment of his career. And in the first round, things looked difficult. Charles was hurt and his dream was in danger. But this was a different Charles Oliveira. He survived, he recovered, and he came back stronger. In the second round, Charles found his moment. He dropped Michael Chandler and finished the fight, becoming the UFC lightweight champion of the world. After more than a decade inside the UFC, after years of criticism and doubt, Charles Oliveira finally reached the top. The boy from Guarujá had become a champion, but his story was far from over.